As you know, I've been a big champion of people creating their own franchises, writing their own books, making their own original indie movies, and so forth, building their own intellectual properties because of how utterly let down many fan bases have been by Hollywood of late, how disenfranchised audiences can be with the direction of their beloved TV series or film series. Now, fan films can be a great way to showcase talent, but they can also regularly demonstrate that creative fans can often tell better stories than the official Hollywood licensed product. The issue is that fans can't make money from their fan films. Fan film projects are tolerated by Hollywood studios, but often include quite stringent filmmaking rules. Chief among them, of course, no financial profit can be generated from them. Now, copyright is very important. It's essential that a creator's work is legally protected and secured as their own property. But the issue is modern copyright laws have become a complete joke, and they go on for way too long. A great deal of popular franchises should already be in the public domain if the original copyright laws had have stayed in place. The Mickey Mouse from Steamboat Willie, which relatively recently entered public domain, is one of the most interesting examples because Disney had basically done everything in their power legally over the decades to extend the life of that IP. They owned it for like 95 years, which is crazy. Now, it's worth noting that the current iteration of Mickey Mouse still belongs to them, and their trademark Mickey Mouse Disney ears permanently belong to them. What's happened recently is that the original 1928 black and white Steamboat Willie cartoon character has entered the public domain. That cartoon itself is public domain now, but only that particular design. So the current version of Mickey Mouse will remain as the official Disney mascot. Now, if we go back to the Copyright Act of 1909 in the United States, it permitted works to be copyrighted for 56 years. Which would have meant that the 1928 Steamboat Willie character would have been in the public domain in 1984. But just a few years before that, Disney lobbied for the Copyright Act of 1976, which extended copyright for characters created before 1978 to 75 years, which meant that Disney would retain ownership of the Steamboat Willie character up until 2003. But of course, once again, as that date drew near, Disney had that extended by lobbying Congress for the 1998 Copyright Extension Act, and that brought us up to 2024. Keep in mind that if the original copyrighted laws had remained in place without all of the lobbying over the decades, then big franchises like Star Trek, for example, and most of the big-name superhero characters, tons of films and TV shows and books would already be in the public domain. And it wasn't all just Disney doing the lobbying either. I mean, lots of the other big corporate media and studios have wanted such extensions and benefited from them over the years. It's just been pure greed, especially considering that in many instances, the original creator of a character or work is long dead. It's just that the studio has bought the intellectual property and continue to milk it for all it's worth. Now, some very big-name fictional characters have entered the public domain already. You probably know that Bram Stoker's Dracula entered the public domain in 1962. Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes entered public domain fully in January of 2023. Oscar Wilde's Dorian Gray has been public domain for some time, as has Jules Verne's Captain Nemo, along with Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This is why some of these characters appeared in the film The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which I previously reviewed on the channel. Because they're free from copyright for anyone to use in news stories and settings and to make money out of. So the public domain is a very powerful place. It's a great place to generate ideas and to leverage existing audiences by making use of publicly available fictional characters. Now, incidentally, the character of Thor from Norse mythology is obviously already a public domain character. However, the Marvel version of the character is copyrighted because Disney Marvel's Thor is different to the original mythological character. They've made physical design and lore updates of their own. But you are technically free to use the original Thor and, for example, Loki Norse characters and put your own spin on them, just as the Marvel comics and films did. Now, the next decade, the 2030s, will see some of the most famous superheroes falling into the public domain, assuming there isn't another major copyright extension act. So we're going to probably see Superman, Lois Lane, Batman, Wonder Woman, and the likes of Captain America all go public domain. Now again, it's important to state that only the original versions of these characters from when they first appeared will be available, so their first comic book appearances. So when, for example, Superman goes public domain in, I think it's 2034, correct me if I'm wrong, it'll be the first issue design of Superman from the 1938 Action Comics edition. Likewise, only the 1939 Detective Comics version of Batman will be in the public domain when he first goes public domain. So people will have to be careful to not make use of the designs of Superman and Batman from more recent publications. As the years go on, more recent versions and designs of these characters, their villains and stories will enter the public domain. Now, I'll be an old man by the time my beloved Star Trek and its first season enters the public domain. Star Trek's pilot episode, The Cage, should be public domain in about 2062, I think. That's a long way away. I may very well be dead by then, to be honest. So you could write and produce stories and films based on Captain Pike, Spock, and Number One, and the Enterprise and the planet Talos 4. Only the stuff that's in that episode. And then maybe a year or so later, the original series' first season would follow. Then season 2, season 3. A little over 10 years later, you'd be able to make stories about V'ger and the updated Enterprise from the motion picture feature film. The first episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation won't be public domain until about the early 2080s or so. I'm going to need to time travel in order to be alive for that. Eventually, in around 2072 or 73, I think Star Wars will then go public domain. So very, very long way away. And of course, that will only be the original version of A New Hope. While it's certainly preferable to come up with your own entirely original characters and stories, there's already quite a few characters in the public domain for you to use. People are writing new stories for the likes of Sherlock Holmes, King Kong, Robin Hood, Dracula, and there's even books and films based off of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. There are options there, and you can put your own spin on these characters. Long term, some of the even bigger DC and Marvel characters will be copyright free in the next few decades, like I say. So the fan films of the future will be something people will actually be able to make money off of, but not for a long time. I just think it's very regrettable that there's been so many of these copyright extensions down the years. I think somewhere around 30 to 50 years would be more than adequate copyright protection for a work. I mean, imagine if Star Trek was now in the public domain today. The amount of films and TV series in production would mean a huge amount of people the world over would be employed making these films already. They'd be making money out of them. All of their hard work and energy would be rewarded financially, as opposed to the situation now, which is that they have to be careful to abide by stringent fan film guidelines. But again, as I say, in the coming decades, we're going to see a lot of iconic pop culture characters of the 20th century entering the public domain, and we might be headed for a golden age of creativity, where at last entirely new creative interpretations can be put on these long-lived creations. Too bad I'll be 70 or 80 when that happens. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Take care. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.